Your vendor passed all the audits, but now your data is still leaked and it's available online. The problem? The supply chain. Welcome to Threat Talks. My name is Leeuwen Jan Koning, and here from headquarters at Ontoit, we bring you the next episode of Threat Talks. And the subject of today is how do we make legislation to prevent us from these disasters? Let's get on to it. Welcome to Threat Talks. Let's delve deep into the dynamic world of cybersecurity. Let me introduce my guest of today. I'm really thrilled she is here. Her name is Lokke Moerel, and we could actually fill a whole podcast just naming what she is doing today. So I'll have to look at my card a little bit. Well, she is first of all, she's a leading voice in the European Union on cybersecurity, privacy, and all those subjects. She's a professor of Global ICT Law at the Tilburg University, and she's a senior counsel at the Morrison and Foerster Global Data and Cyber team. Is that correct so far?
Absolutely.
Yeah. She's also a member of the Dutch Cybersecurity Council, which is quite an elite group. And she is also part of the AI Coalition for the Netherlands. She recently won 2 prizes with that. I'll leave the rest to the show notes. You know why I'm thrilled that she's here. Lokke, welcome. Welcome to the show.
My pleasure.
Great to have you here. Recently, we had an episode on the new legislation that is there with Bart Groothuis, who co-created this.
Well known.
We learn from him that is quite fundamental. What is going to change, and we're going to talk about that in this episode a lot on what it actually means for organizations. But before we do that, could you explain a little bit all these kind of what is coming? I mean, because we have the Cybersecurity Act, but there's more. Can you enlighten us? You know all this.
It's a complete alphabet soup of all the acronyms. Anyway. We had a law regulating ENISA, which is the center of expertise for setting certification frameworks, etc. It's all a bit older law. And then we had NIS1 for the critical infrastructure for organizational resilience. That is now replaced by NIS2, still to be implemented in the Netherlands. It's second quarter of this year, the implementation law will apply. Then we have DORA, also organizational resilience for the financial sector. And then we have the CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act, which is cybersecurity requirements for products and services. So they try to, and the DORA and NIS2 also include supply chain requirements that you need to look after your supply chain. And not in, the third degree, but your first direct suppliers, you need to check whether they will live up to your requirements.
And all these laws, do they work together, or are they? It's like a patched.
Well, it is a bit patched, and for instance, all those laws, including GDPR, have notification requirements. So there were incident notification requirements. So there were a lot of complaints, how many times you needed to notify. This new cybersecurity package are major improvements. One on the notification requirements and the other one on certifications also for the supply chain. We'll discuss that in a bit
so
more
there's
depth.
A lot coming, and is it already in effect, or when do you expect this to be
this is
there?
all draft, and I'm sure things will change, but certain components are sure to be there, and you better prepare for it. And that is why we have this discussion.
Yeah, because it's really a fundamental shift that not many people understand what is coming from. If you thought that NIS2 was impactful, or DORA was impactful, or GDPR, you haven't seen anything yet, correct?
Well, for me, NIS2 and DORA are very much, I don't want to be, but basic cyber risk management, ensuring that everybody has the same baseline. And now you see certain things being stepped up. The best. Shall we already go to the supply frame requirements?
Sure. Let's focus on the supply chain. Yeah, but maybe let's start with why. What is the problem here? Actually, what we're trying to solve. I mean, last time with Bart, he already explained to us China is already in our homes. So apparently, we buy stuff that is not as secure, digitally speaking, as we would want it to be, and it's like. Without knowing, it's already in our society, and we've seen in the United States how the Chinese are in the phone systems. I mean, we have plenty of episodes of Threat Talks about all that. But could you tell me what?
Well, let's the energy transition. Everybody has solar panels now, and you have. Anyway, we focused on getting greener and being quick over instead of also the cybersecurity. So we have endless Chinese
equipment
everywhere, which is vulnerable. So BART is
all those Chinese cars have a camera in them and
absolutely
can watch over us, right?
So BART has a point there. And the CRA, which is the requirements for products and services, are about security of the relevant, the item itself, but the whole vulnerability of having so many Chinese components in your whole system is, it's not only your own organization buying, but it's the whole ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So what the new package does is split out certifications for the product itself, for the organizations itself, even for suppliers. You can now also have a certification, so companies can rely on the certification, supply chain certification of their suppliers, which is a benefit because it was a mess before that. Everybody had its own requirements. ASML set its own standards for its suppliers. Everybody had it. The Belgians said, if you do this, then it's fine.
Because that's very much to the EU nature. There are so many different opinions, so many different voices, and somehow this will now be cemented as, so it's no longer optional per country. It's now mandatory for the whole European Union. So it's really like a tectonic shift in how we think about it.
For supply chain, that is really good because that gives you certify under one framework, and then it should be valid all around Europe. So
but what do we? What's the?
Yeah, but the other part, and that is more difficult, is that they said, okay, we're going to split that technical part from the geopolitical issues, which is China having access to or connected products where they can still get the data, whatever. Anyway.
Yeah. So by decoupling this, you make it much easier to implement, I imagine.
Well, ENISA was responsible for setting all the certification frameworks. But they couldn't deliver on the cloud framework. Why? Because France wanted to have sovereignty requirements in there. Is the supplier Europe, or they're not allowed to have a US parent? So they couldn't agree on it because some of the member states thought it was ridiculous and France was adamant. So the certification framework stalled. And now they said, we're going to split the technical requirements from the geopolitical requirements. All the certification frameworks are technical. Product related, etc. And then separate from that, we make a horizontal ecosystem framework. And that is about defining for each sector, like the telco, what are critical ICT components in networks, and then setting sovereignty requirements for those, meaning that you can't have a Chinese component in your telco network if it is a critical element in that.
At least not one that's connected to the Chinese cloud, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. And for telcos, they already agreed on something like that. And basically, based on that, they are now saying, okay, and that we need that also for health. We also need it for energy. We also need it for cloud. So that is the big difference.
So these if you want to have these compliance frameworks that are technical, they vet vendors, they vet products, maybe. So what does it mean? Can we also no longer then import goods anymore that do not comply to these certifications? Is it that strong, or is that per sector? Say there's a law that says for telco, these minimum requirements are valid, or is it for everything? Like, for example, a car, that I can't buy a car if it doesn't, or an importer cannot import a car from China or from the United States for that matter. It's probably the same. It's probably less of a problem, but...
well, that is an individual car. It is about what do we consider critical infrastructures that are cross-border, which is telecommunications, that is satellite, that is cloud, that is energy networks completely connected to each other.
So it focuses on those sectors and those systems that are of...
If one car fails, that is a different issue than our energy network.
Yeah, so, but if all cars, if 20% of the cars is Chinese and we're all being shut down at the same moment.
Yeah, but don't forget, it is not an import restriction. You're not allowed to import these requirements, which wouldn't be allowed under the WTO. It is for the telco sector as a whole, we consider this component critical or whatever, and then you cannot use a Chinese.
Yeah, so it's how you apply these materials or these services or whatever that you procure, how you put them to work, that matters.
That matters.
It's not the fact that it ships here, for example, like it would for safety for toys, for example. That's a different ballgame. That's there we said actually.
They
so
stop it at the border, but
exactly.
Here it is. Yeah, that is a generic requirement. Here it is, depending on the use, depending on the criticality of the sector. So and that makes. I think that is, especially for US headquartered companies, that is a major shift because in the US, look, all the systems are and everything is in the US. So they're less worried about importing stuff. What they are worried about is that sensitive data of US citizens or companies is moving to China. So their regime is all around, you're not allowed to transfer certain categories of data to China.
The Bulk Data Act.
The Bulk Data Act. So they have all types of compliance programs around data. And if you move now to Europe and you suddenly need to look at what is happening here, it is not mapping the data elements that are sensitive where they go. It is about, are you, just imagine you're a provider, do you provide to a bank a function or a service that is critical for the function, the financial service function of the bank? If that is the case, you are subject to all types of more heavy security requirements, etc.
So see if I understand this difference. So in America, if there is a bank and you sell, let's say, a camera system or so, what they're going to check is whether those camera systems move lots of data to a Chinese or an alien cloud or something not US.
Not allowed. And then it depends on the type of data category. I mean, some data is fine and others not.
Yeah, but the equipment, you can buy the equipment, you can put the equipment to work. That doesn't matter as long as the data doesn't flow out.
Yeah.
That's
well, remember we had the Clean Cloud Act some time ago in Trump 1. And there they wanted to have a clean network as well, no Chinese elements there. So they have a similar. It's not that they are fine with having all the Chinese components in their telco networks or cloud. So,
but that's the US. So in the US, it's fine to have the equipment there. You can buy it, import it. Never a problem. But you buy the stuff, you put it to work as long as you don't leak the data back, right?
Yeah.
And here you say it's not about that. It's about in what function you put like a business function, like a primary business process, or so a camera system. Maybe for the parking lot is probably okay, but if it's to protect your physical vault, then something else. And it doesn't matter. We're in the EU is not looking at whether the data from that camera gets to China, but whether this product in itself is certified according to the new rules.
Yeah, and whether and it needs to be if it's critical here in the infrastructure we have. And the point is. And for a long time, everybody thought this is an individual service, a cloud service to an individual company. But now the realization has set in that cloud infrastructure is in fact like telecommunications infrastructure. It is our baseline infrastructure we need for, public function. So this infrastructure is basically a public infrastructure and should be regulated to protect our businesses, our governments, our people. And if you live in America, then you would argue, it's a free market. Don't do those crazy laws. If you're not happy with the service that we're offering, buy something else. Yeah, and then we say, look, but it doesn't meet our requirements because we want to have control over our data, and that is not that weird. I mean, the US government has a government cloud. It is not like a public cloud. It's completely protected, dedicated cloud for them. It is not that, it's open, everybody can service it. They also have their requirements. So if then one of the big tech delivers services to us, to the government, and then they say, look, we want a dedicated cloud. And they say, well, we have the public cloud, and this is our rules. Yeah,
but the telcos in the United States also, like you say, that arguably, telco is already a regulated market. Because,
totally.
Why? Because of the obvious society requirement. What's that?
Well, it is a critical infrastructure for functioning, and cloud is by now in that category. And we always regulated any critical infrastructure, whether it was the rails, the water system, everything has interoperability requirements, quality requirements, and suddenly cloud is,
forgotten.
Hands off, and
so it's not like the Europeans making new rules or so.
No.
They're just a little bit late to the party. Oh,
yeah, absolutely late to the party, and not only that, but in the US they regulate it too if they need it for their specific purposes. It's not that their defense Department of War these days is in the public cloud. Don't get me wrong.
So what you're saying is in the European Union, because if you look at from a distance at how the US handles these issues and EU handles these issues, it's often said that the EU over-regulates everything with GDPR, etc. But what you're saying is the US does the same thing. It's just not as apparent because it's more in the government ecosystem where that happens.
Yeah. Well, don't forget, they have NIST, which is the standard-setting organization. They have all cyber risk management standards. They have AI risk management standards. If you do not follow them, you will have claims in court, and everybody who buys your services are saying, look, you need to be certified under those frameworks. So
the difference between the US and EU is probably that it's easier to get something certified in the US. Why? Because all the infrastructure is there already.
For example, but the point is we made a law basically saying, well, you need to have that certification and standard implemented because otherwise you do not comply with the law. There's far more. If Microsoft buys anything from anybody, they will require those certifications. And they will give the certifications themselves. Why would you trust a supplier not having those certifications? It's more a mature market. They have that infrastructure there. We get it as a customer. And then we say, look, we would like to have the data here. We would like to have the service personnel here. We would like to have the metadata also here. So we are in control of our data. And then everybody is surprised. Well, I'm not. I'm not.
Understood. Yeah. Very, very clear. So this is all coming towards us. And now, if you are an organization, either in the EU, because you are confronted with these new things when you procure stuff, but also if you're a US seller, you're entering the European market, that means something for you. What should we do today? Because we have a little time, if I understand you correctly. But it's also a big change, so we should probably start today.
Yeah. Look,
how?
If you are in the supply chain of any companies that are NIS2 or DORA regulated.
That's critical infrastructure, but much more.
Yeah, much more. Exactly. And then they all know whether they are, because then they got requests for...
They got a call by the government.
Exactly. And then if I were them, I would really follow ENISA, how that scheme, the certification scheme for the supply chain will look like, and try to anticipate on that, whether you need anything that you don't have yet. So you're the first to certify, because that is a competitive advantage then, because they will say, okay, that's fine. So that is one. I would read the whole bloody package to see what is coming and where they are going.
Where do I get this? Where can I download it somewhere?
Just Google on EU Cybersecurity package. And then you have the package with all the draft laws and also the annexes. And those are important for the telco. For the telecom sector, they already wrote down what the the critical components are. And
if we're not as clever as you, we can put them into ChatGPT and ask them to summarize.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We'll put a link in the show notes then for that gets you that detail.
Put the links in, and the interesting part I flagged when I read the overview for telecommunication was, the working group. There was something like you were allowed to have Huawei. I don't know exactly how I pronounce it, but you were not allowed
Huawei, whatever.
You were not allowed to have it in the core, but in broader circles around you, you were allowed to have it. I think it is now on the list that certain components are critical, with no distinction whether they are in the core or broader. So meaning you need to phase out more.
Yeah.
Now, if you
don't want it to cost money, you start now, because if you have to do a follow-up, you better search for alternatives.
Just imagine you just implemented components from China, and then you need to phase them out again. So
it's a bit like climate change. The earlier you start fixing it, the cheaper it is.
Totally. So make sure you know what is coming. It is what we call RegTech. It is a regulation of technology. You need to know what is coming to be able to innovate or adapt your supply chain, your networks,
So that's the first thing we do tomorrow. We read everything.
Yeah.
That put in the show notes. And then?
Well, check whether you are in those high critical sectors like cloud, telecommunications, energy.
What do you mean by cloud here?
Cloud,
anything
managed, cloud services, all of them.
But that's everybody.
It's a very broad definition. So I think a lot of companies.
That's everybody.
Yeah, a lot of them. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the big elephant in the room is: will the US be listed as one of those third country suppliers that is suspicious? And are we allowed to then, or are you required to say no US components in our core? And reading all the requirements when third countries are suspicious, it's all about, let me think, it's about, do they require you, if you have a 0 day, to notify it to the authorities, even if it hasn't been exploited yet? Do you see? So because then there's the risk that they can exploit it for, national security purposes. So that is one requirement, or we don't know. And if I don't know, did you read the U.S. cybersecurity strategy?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll give my take, and maybe you have a different take. But what I read is, now having read a lot about the US and Trump, one, they're going to have offensive capabilities far more than before, which was always tricky, but you're not, because that is sometimes a criminal act to get into, to breach into somebody's computer system. So offensive. They want to weaponize the private sector to do that. I see the big tech also, thinking, what does it mean? How far does it go? Are we then off the hook if we do it? There's a lot of confusion what they should do in an offense, from an offensive perspective. Then third, they say, look, our enemies are any country that hinders free speech or regulates, interferes with free speech. That is exactly the complaint they have about Europe. So here I read Europe. So what, and we are going to defend our values. Well, the values are very different. And we see that we also had a presentation of the ambassador of the US here in the Netherlands. And he says, well, I'm here to build business and blah, blah, blah. And the third task he has is export his culture and his values.
Yeah.
And what are those values? That is the, tech sovereignty they want to achieve, the white supremacy. I mean, so if he lives up to this strategy, I will not be surprised that type of, if those components they deliver or services are in the high critical sectors and are critical components, that will not be allowed. So, I mean, my goodness.
Yeah, that's that would be very impactful, because much of the cloud and all IT is actually from the United States, and if that's certainly not allowed for these reasons, and the government, of course, has been slimmed down recently, so that also means that all the oversight committees or the independence in that is going out of the door. That we've see that happen. So you might argue that if your data is accessible and that's not just the United States, but maybe it's natural that it happens in any country, but it's also at least accessible by the other legislation there. We're actually going to talk about this in a follow-up episode on how this actually works, about the different kinds of sovereignty and whether we want it or not. But those things come into play there now, and there are certainly no guarantees at the moment from that the EU gets from the US. All these examples that you mentioned, that they are there. So then it might, but this is a bit of the political thing that you said. That's now split out. So there's going to be like these almost mathematical
security requirements
that you do, and you either, that's a Boolean value, it's either true or not true, and then the geopolitical decision, which countries and which suppliers, etc., fall into that. That's up for debate, and we'll see how that
how
works
it will
out.
pan
But it
out.
could flip that side, and then it has big ramifications. Doesn't mean we cannot use anything from China or from the United States in Europe
but not
at all.
in the high critical sectors, in high critical components.
So what's the idea here of the European Union then? Is because GDPR, many see this as a very successful piece of legislation. Why? Because now the rules of GDPR are because they had to by Microsoft, by Amazon. They are all agreed upon, whether they liked it or not, or so. So even the US market is now under GDPR more or less, because it doesn't make sense to make two versions of the same product.
Yeah.
Is the hope of this legislation also that the same thing would happen, you think?
Well, no, because the US will always use their US components. So if they can't use it for the EU market,
but the EU is a big market. I mean, there's a
no,
bigger economy than the United
States. With
States.
this regulation, you will see more regions. Do you see? And I also see that with AI. Sometimes they launch products like ChatGPT Health. Remember, that is available in the US, but not in Europe, because that would qualify as a medical device and would require all types of certifications. They may want to certify
my
it.
Apple Watch here does fewer things than it does when I'm in the United States.
So we will
and
see.
I hate it, honestly.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm no comment. But we will see.
No, just as an individual. I mean, I fully understand why.
Yeah.
But it's you see that there's two the risk for the European Union here is that there's two paces of development of innovation. Then, huh?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. But those are on very specific topics. I think the generic stuff is not that different. The AI Act, I see that will have the Brussels effect, as you say, kind of. Why? Because it is basically good hygiene, which is very in line with NIST requirements for AI. We have the code of practice for the LLMs, for the general purpose AI. Once you implement that, you do that for everything. And don't forget, Microsoft already complies with everything. It is, if Trump is all like, oh, we don't have any regulation is also having a trust label. So it's nice to say for US companies, yeah, but we comply with the EU AI Act, which is really
so even if the European Union has a lower level of requirements, then the companies impose on themselves a stricter one because they want to address different markets as well. And we actually see it in different states as well. I mean, state of California, for example, has much stricter laws in this sense. So that effect is all
it's
also
already there. And
on AI, honestly, I think I would expect that. So right now we need all the clouds, but it's going on-prem fast. I mean, for our company, for example, we do not use for customer data. We do not use
the public cloud anymore.
No, because we use it ourselves. It's not that difficult. I mean, training models is crazy expensive and crazy. So we rely on the cloud to do that, but not to actually push data through it. So if we're paying attention, all of us together, then
it's
can
a
be locally
different topic.
Done.
But I agree. I agree.
Let's get back on track, because we were talking about what should we do today, and we already covered. I'll read the legislation that we put in show notes, and figure out whether
summaries available.
How does it apply to you?
Yeah.
And then what should I already investigate what suppliers I have, for example? Should I map stuff?
Well, if you're on the NIS2 and DORA, you should have done that already. If you are a supplier to those type of companies, by now I think you are aware what it is required. But I think you go bananas then if you deliver services or products to many NIS2 customers, because they all have their different requirements, and that will improve. So I think you would try to get your own certifications to be able to say, look, I'm fine.
I have two last questions. One, how much time does it take until it's here, and how certain are we that it will be there?
I think it will be there. Let's start with that, because there are
like a 99.9%.
Yeah, because the improvements, they're
likely enough for me.
There's less red tape by allowing one notification to ENISA for GDPR, for NIS2, for DORA.
Yeah, that's a big relief. What? That's a big relief.
That is a big relief. So people will want to push that through, and Parliament as well. I don't know what Bart said in the last.
Benefit.
There's a lot of benefit having a one certification.
Bart was still in negotiation, so.
Oh, okay. Well, he couldn't say too much.
No, he said he expects a couple of troubles and between countries and some debate and so on. But the general thing, it's everybody agrees that it has to be like this, and it's more in the details where it will change. That's what he expects.
Okay.
And is there one person who knows?
No. I wouldn't know. But I think the big thing is the geopolitical part, where you have that type of sovereignty requirements on for certain sectors, and then you will say there will be a debate. Should it be that sector as well, or telco? Everybody is agreed, but is it also?
But it will probably grow. I mean, then there is an incident in some sector, and then we'll probably add it to it. So over time, it will be the standard for a big portion of the economy.
Yeah, and it gives certain implementing acts.
How much time do we have?
Well, if it is finalized, I think you need, if you're a telco company, within 36 months, you need to have phased out all those components.
36.
Yeah. And then you're no longer allowed to put in new ones, sure. Mm-hmm. So you have some leeway, but it can be very costly if you just implement.
So if you're a supplier, there's also lots of opportunity for new organizations that know that they will now have a competitive advantage.
Yeah, but
so
it's
you better
also
be prepared.
Your satellites. It's also I don't know. I think it's a big boost for European business as well. So I'm sure,
and US as well, if they don't fall the wrong side of the.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So
it's telco, it's financial sector, it's healthcare, it's drone technology, military, energy.
And that is, to be honest, I'm in the Cybersecurity Council looking in a deep dive project for the energy networks. We need to step up there. There's no doubt about it. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It means a lot of new insights and new information.
Okay, good.
Thank you so much. We have stuff to do. We have a to-do list now. The first thing is go to the show notes and figure out what the legislation is all about. And then we'll plan ahead and think what it will mean to us and put it in our strategic plans, because that's what we really should do. Yeah. Thank you so much. And to our viewers, thank you very much for listening in today. If you liked this episode, click the like button. You can also click the subscribe button, because there will be a next episode with Lokke here. And this is all about data sovereignty and the different kinds of data sovereignty. Did you know there were 3? I didn't. We'll find out next time. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you next time. Thank you for listening to Threat Talks, a podcast by Ontoit Cybersecurity and AMS-IX. Did you like what you heard? Do you want to learn more? Follow Threat Talks to stay up to date on the topic of cybersecurity.